Ninjas. Some of the fastest, stealthiest, most finely tuned people in our world. Right now we are looking into one such potential new upcomer and he just walked, not even random, just like a brisk walk. Anywho, now we see him performing his arts, which just has him spinning his arms around. Well, now we have him performing the great secret art of stealth. Even now you cannot... Oh, for God's sakes, what are you doing? This is not even a ninja. What are you?
Well, I'm a new breed of ninja. I'm a ninja who doesn't bother to hide.
That he's not a ninja. Ninjas are supposed to be stealthy, sneaky, get in, get out without ever being seen.
So, then what kind of ninja does that make?
You're just some idiot running
Ninja does that make
running, making motions not even all black. Jesus, what is wrong with you? You are not ninja.
Didn't have to be so hurtful.
The following material is owned by the respective rights holders. In this episode's case, the rights are held by Toei. Hey, please support the official release in any means necessary if possible.
Hello, welcome to another Toku Ramblings. Today we are talking about Shuriken Sentai Ninninger. Often cited as one of the worst Sentais in recent memories, a new punching bag that joins the likes of Turbo Ranger, Old Ranger, what are some other hated Sentais? 5-Man, Cow Ranger, people like that. So, what do I think of the quote-unquote worst Sentai in recent memories? It's not the worst. It's not great. It's not good, but I'd say it has like 10% of it being enjoyable. So, Ninninger's plot more or less starts with backstory. So, long ago in the Sengoku period, a warlord was within grasp, controlling all of Japan. And it wasn't Oda Nobunaga or Masamune. Nay, it was the totally real warlord Gengetsu Kibayone. But of course, before he was able to rule the country with fear, he was stopped by the ninjas of the Igasaki clan who killed him. But before his death, he claimed that more or less he would return in 44 years to destroy humanity. For those wondering why 444, it's basically Japan's version of 666. When that time came, of course, Gengetsu returned as a yokai with his army, but the Igasakis were again there to stand against him. Specifically, the last ninja Yoshitaka Igasaki, a name he gained when he more or less sealed him away. Which, I don't get the last ninja thing. It's not like more or less all the ninjas were destroyed by him. There were ninjas before and after him, so why is it? Is it just supposed to sound cool? I'm more confused by it. Anywho, apparently the calendar keeper of the clan screwed up, and the date that Kibayone claimed that he would return on was actually in 2015. I mean, wouldn't more or less you want to cross-check the date that more or less Kibayone died and then more or less ensure that date is right? Kind of more or less a failure on that end. I'm saying anywho way too many times. Okay. Yeah, I still allow Yoshitaka and his own son Tsumuji bring together the next generation of Igasaki ninjas in order to combat Gengetsu's army, but also more or less potentially become the next last ninja. So yeah, another reason why calling him the last ninja is dumb, because more or less he's technically not the last ninja, because more or less someone else can become the last ninja. And why not something like True Ninja or Star Ninja? No, wait, they can't do the Star because more or less that's a ranger that comes later. Who amongst the family is Tsumuji's own son Takahara Igasaki, who becomes Aka Ninja, being the eldest and a hardcore fan. His grandfather and desires the most to become the last ninja. He's also the most Sure, them easily excitable and rather hot-blooded, and depending on who you ask, everything uncle-bodied red ninja. Red sentais. Then there's Mokato, Ao Ninja. You're the cool-headed, cocky one who prior to returning to Japan was also practicing magic in England. And not the parlor trick variety magic, but like actual legitimate magic he more or less mixes with his ninjutsu art. Nagi Matsu, Key Ninja. The baby of the bunch who is more or less wanting to prove himself despite more or less his lack of experience. Takaharu's more responsible and serious younger sister Fuka, who also has sort of a butt monkey trend going with her in certain instances. And lastly, Kasumi Momochi, a college student studying science who becomes the team's smart girl and is often inventing new equipment to help them. Of course, a Sentai post-1992 has a sixth ranger in the form of Kinji Takigawa, an American-born yokai hunter who is also a fan of the Last Ninja, who used Yoshitaki's own book to make his own equipment and become more or less Star Ninja. Owen become a student in the Last Ninjas in hope of avenging his brother and father. And of course, they are assisted by the elder Yoshitakis. So, I'll say that the plot initially has some interesting ideas going on. Like, the fact that the team is technically competing against one another to become the successor, and that the family relationship is actually pretty neat. It also helps that we get a decent idea of everyone's personalities, though how good it is more or less depends on something. The problem comes when we get to the middle portion, where we get a whole bunch more episodic adventures that do little advancing the plot, and really the whole competition aspect doesn't matter at all to a certain point. Well, yeah, they keep bringing it up, but it's mostly just there as a background note. After a point, you kind of forget it's happening outside the series, consistently reminding you that they're trying to become the last ninja. So, I divide the main six into more or less three categories. The terrible ones, the ones who more or less I kind of really struggle to remember, and the two that I actually kind of like. So let's start with the terrible ones, which, ironically in this case, more or less actually goes in the order that the roll call happens. Takaharu, he's not great. He's the basic caricature of what people don't like about Reds and modern Sentais. He's loud, he's annoying, he steals the spotlight for a good amount of times, and he's always screaming that catchphrase of, "I'm fired up!" But it's not really him screaming, more just like, saying it loud enough to more or less sound like screaming, but more or less not waking up anyone in the house, like when it's 2 in the morning. And you're like, let me just give you a background of how much Takaharu matters in the first episode. So, in episode 1, he's the only one really wanting to do the things, and his courage more or less spurs the others to join in fighting them. The second episode is a Yakumo-focused episode, but more or less it also involves Takaharu, because, Takaharu more or less sucks at the actual schooling, and I really have come to despise that kind of trend. I don't like the whole, someone sucks at school but also is great, but does really great in the field. It's just, I know more or less that's a thing with some people, but it's just frustrating in certain instances, and more or less, quote-unquote, Yakumo's a bit jealous. Then episode 3, which is a Nagi-focused episode, deals with him more or less trying to more or less do stuff by the books, and more or less realizing that what happens in the book and what happens in the fight is not true, and more or less deciding to be closer to Takaharu and Yakumo. Heck, despite more or less beating his focus episode, he's not the one to kill the monster, since he's more or less somewhere else learning this lesson. Then episode 4 is basically a Takaharu focus episode. But I don't like it, like the whole lesson of, we need to work together. And then more or less a few episodes later, we get the same lesson of, work together. Episode 5 is probably the least egregious to talk about, because it focuses a lot more on Kasumi, and more or less, thankfully, her character is able to more or less avoid having the spotlight stolen for mostly him. But the fact that he's just handing out balloons really frustrates me. And like, it's very clear that more or less, he is the main protagonist, because more or less at the end of the first arc, despite him being heavily injured and having been beaten up earlier, by basically the arc one enemy gen. Well, despite more or less Kenji more or less saying that he probably shouldn't go, he claims that more or less his family is waiting for him because they know they can't win, which they more or less say they can do, and because more or less power levels are as in more. And more or less, technically, you are stronger when you are more or less in a more critical state. He's able to now beat him because the writers more or less say it's time to win. I don't want to repeat the claim that more or less, Sentai is a team show. It's not just a writer's series with a bunch of backup. Damn. Serious. But it kind of feels like it throughout most of this, unless everyone else is there to prop him. And of course, he more or less gets the now standard red power-up that no one wants in. Yes, it becomes a team thing. But I get the feeling that it was initially meant just for him, but more or less they realized people didn't like that, so they made it a more team thing. Also, this laugh he more or less does in the 4th episode is probably the worst 3 seconds of the entire show. I'll give credit where credit is due here, because I am grasping at straws for a certain instance. Like, they tried to fix him. Like, in the second half, he's given a bit of a chill pill and has less spotlight in certain aspects and is willing to more or less hand over the reins to others, like when he gives Nagi the Chozetsu form in an episode. But that goes to the next issue of more or less, he doesn't really have that many focus episodes in the latter half. I think I can only count one involving as a childhood friend of his who he helps school some kids in ninja arts. But outside of that, yeah, he's mostly just a supporting character. The rest after that. Like, I don't think he's like the worst. I think this is also just an issue of the acting is not the best and the writing doesn't do any favors, which kind of also goes for Yakumo, who's the other bad one. Like, the actor Gaku Matsumoto, I think, does a fine enough job portraying him, but it's like certain instances are more where it feels like he's either trying too hard or not hard enough. And that's like noticeable in like what I consider the 3 worst episodes of the show, which focus on 3 things: Yakumo and love. Well, more too. Things like that. Yeah, I'll get to that later. But it's also the fact that more or less Yakumo also kind of just serves as a plot coupon for certain instances with the magic. His magic just does anything. It does literally anything. Shields, fire magic, cyclones, levitation. A spell that literally tells you, that can literally make people tell you what they want. A shrinking magic. It's like, there's no rules with it. It's just a plot MacGuffin whenever more or less something needs to happen. It's just, I don't hate him, but at the same time, like, those episodes are like, it really drags the character down. So, moving on to the second portion, there is Nagi and Fuka. Nagi is probably the most forgettable. I mean, he's rather friendly and more or less kind of being the street, ends up more growing into sort of the streetwise, always coming up with stuff on the fly here, but he's a nice guy of the group, and more or less despite the fact that he gets a good chunk of focus episodes throughout, both solo and shared with other people, I just can't remember him. I cannot remember much about him outside of him doing something because either he's the kid of the group and more or less does stuff to be funny, or more or less helping out in the odd ways. That's just his character. And then Fuka kind of gets a little less what is wrong with me? She is Takaharu's Ryu's sister and more or less get some more things. She kind of ends up being the season's sort of butt monkey with either screwing up ninjutsu and more or less stuff happening to her that's odd. She does have a really an aggravating focus. I want to call it focus because really she's more or less just someone we have to please for the episode, and it's more just like so where she gets aggravated because more or less they haven't had a day off, and more like she gets aggravated when they have to do more ninja stuff because the dad's more or less the goofball. And the group has to play around her good time, and when a yokai shows up, instead of more or less telling her to fix it so they can get back to this, they decide to more or less let her enjoy that while they end up fighting it on their own. Yeah, I'm just not fond of that kind of thing. But yeah, so far the cast has either been terrible or forgetful. Alright, but the last two, okay, they don't save this team, but more or less they do a best. Kasumi is easily the best of the base 5. I think she has the best focus episodes. Her personality is the best, and that more or less she's not overshadowed by Takahara in certain instances. She's always coming up with kind of interesting and cool ideas and more or less figuring out more unique ways to fight. Like with the Chozetsu power-up, instead of just using it for the armor, which I'm not a fan of, she instead combines it with the strongest ninja sword, Ninja Gekiatsu. Tsudo. I'll try saying that every time fast. Strongest ninja sword, Ninja Gekiatsu. Strongest ninja sword, Gekiatsu. Not try. I do like her. She has the best personality. Her focus episodes are the best one, which I've had stated before. But she also doesn't really have much of a story like the rest. She gets a bit of development near the end with the introduction of a new general we'll get to, but she is mostly the smart kind of Sue who could figure her way out of anything. Which is a lot more I can say for Kenji. Because he actually gets a story. Right? It's not like the greatest story arc this series has ever done, but like, it's something. So, innately he's not part of the team. Rather, he is sort of a rival that the team has to put up with because he's been promised by Yoshitaka to more or less, that he will train him if he can at least beat one of his grandchildren, which is a pretty interesting perspective for a 6 that I have seen so far. But the issue is he kind of feels a bit wishy-washy, like, I'm gonna beat you guys, I'm gonna cook for you, I'm gonna beat you, we're best friends now. Oh no, it's almost time's almost up, I gotta kill you now. Now, it's also the issue that it doesn't last long. Once he's more or less forced and probably the most ridiculous Deus Ex at I can think of. Seriously, American time. That doesn't last long. He's more or less kicked out of the plot for a little bit, and by a little bit I mean one episode before being welcomed back, and then more or less the group does something to oppress him, and more or less now he's basically just a regular member. Yes. He's kind of more or less this unique view of American stereo. Types, he's dressed like a cowboy, he's into hard rock, and is quite hot-blooded like Takahara. And a lot of people, everyone more or less says that more or less Takahara and Kenji are away in a lot of ways, but there are some differences that I think make him a lot better. He's not as loud. His catchphrase is only for the roll call, unlike Takahara. And more or less, the writers just don't treat Kenji like he's basically Japanese Jesus. And again, he's the only one really with a story from going from a vengeance-seeking yokai hunter to a true ninja who's wanting to fight for the better. Man. and his relationship with Kyoimon, who's, spoiler alert, one of the better villains on the villain side, gives for some neat contrast. It's also more. I also like how more or less it initially feels like the story ends when more or less he defeats the werewolf here, and then it comes back alone more but near the end. And it's, again, not the greatest story, but I feel less it's an actual attempt at one, which not everyone gets. Okay, I think I've been positive enough for a few minutes. Time more let's be negative again, huh? Granddad. I hate him. I hate this trickster mentor kind of character that more less just shows up whenever to say a bunch of nonsense, and more often than just says you suck because more or less you're doing it wrong. That's all he is. He just shows up from time to time to be an old. He's not like the cool old person like they say in the show. The annoying kind of old person who's more that's constantly badgering the younger generation. Like, the dad is not like the greatest, but he tries. He's at least trying to more let's teach these kids something. What's more less than just a whole bunch of nonsense, or more or less just do stuff on your own and more or less being a dick about it. That like the dad's big thing is more or less, oh, he's like the uncool dad who more or less is still also a big nerd about ninjas, but he also can't really do ninjutsu because of an accident. Yeah, but he's at least trying to teach these kids something, unlike the granddad who's more was just there to be angry and less old and bitter. That's sort of it for supporting cast. There's the power-up line Arrow, who's just basically every annoying old stereotype of more that's going to be acting like he's 20, and then there's his blacksmith who barely has any character. So yeah, most of the main cast is not great, either more or less forgettable or annoying in some capacity. And unfortunately, the villains are not strong either. Okay, Kyoimon is at least, I'd say, decent. He is probably the best villain the series has. He is constantly planning stuff to happen to defeat the ninjas and collect fear and energy. He has the most involvement in the story with connections to the ninjas, which is something the rest of the cast doesn't have, and is a legitimate threat throughout the most instead of just being there. That's the only thing that I'm not fond of is the fact that his backstory is kind of rather forced, just out of nowhere. It just dropped it. Oh yeah, he used to be a nigga, so he is Sightful. And here's the issue. He's not the main villain. The main villain is Kabayoni, and the thing is, he's a puddle for most of the season. He's just sitting there doing nothing outside of a few times where he more or less gives energy for a stronger monster. And that's it. And he has very little presence outside of just constant build-up, and we're never shown why he's a dangerous threat. He's the equivalent of a final doomsday device more than anything else, and honestly, it would have made more sense for Kyoimon to be the main villain, since it fits more thematically. What with him being Gengetsu's son, again, something that's more or less kind of pulled out of nowhere. But it feels right with the new generation trying to fighting one another, and more or less would have served for a better like point where the dad comes out and more or less takes over in a show of him refusing to step down where the granddad of Nagasaki is willing to let the new generation move forward. And yeah, he is basically the main villain for a good chunk of the season, but it's not the main threat. I guess also decently is like the first General Gabi Rizzo. So like, he's not terrible, but at least he does. Like, the rivalry with Takaharu is not great in my opinion. It's just kind of two people who more or less feel the same fighting one. No, we're like, no, at least he is doing things, but things which most of the villains post be kind of take a more passive. Well, much of this season's villain is more or less pushed forward by QA. He's the one who's summoning and making the monsters and growing them, while the rest are just kind of sitting around. Now, in Mollis and Gabri's case, he's killed within in the first 20 episodes as the first season, as the first arc's final boss. But it feels so like I feel like both he and Kirimon bounce off well enough. The schemer to like the bloodthirsty warrior, which unfortunately doesn't really carry over when the next general, Sugamori, is brought in. He's sort of the brains of the organization, who's more focused on weakening the team rather than more less taking them heads on. Of course, he suffers the issue of most evil geniuses. Either his minions are incompetent or more, less his own ego gets way. And after his big push with the first advanced yokai of the season, he's basically on the back burner for most of it, with the exception of his fueler Kirimon and more or less not knowing him. He's just there as a tactician and more or less nothing else, and that also extends to Gengetsu's wife, Araka, who is probably my least favorite main villains. A literal millstone that does nothing after her only real plan of bringing over Western yokai, which, yeah, we'll get to that in a bit, and just complaining and trying to make herself beautiful in a way that more or less essentially prolongs the series and the revival of her husband. But, which, lady, I'm sorry, nothing's fixing those teeth. And more. But for some reason, near the 3/4 mark, she starts to act even more bitchy, as if she was, pregnant and going through mood swings. Which says that she is pregnant, more less Gengetsu's child, Mangetsu. Which seems like he's picking after his mother. Very child. That seems like, oh, great. Another useless villain to add on to the already growing pile. And then more or less immediately afterwards, he shows that he's a lot smarter, brutal, and serious in being ninjas. It's arguably the biggest threat that the team faces throughout the entire show, and I would be congratulating him on that. But Mangetsu is more just a slightly longer lasting monster, lasting only 4 weeks, and only 3 of those episodes has him as a threat. And more or less it's just serving to revive Gengetsu, which would serve thematically well if more last season wanted to do something of the family relationship, which again, it doesn't do. They're like, yes, I think the family dynamic with the Igasakis is fine. It's arguably probably the best part of that character. This feels like a legitimate family, but when compared to the actual enemy family in the Kibayoni faction, it's weak. It's not there. It just exists. That's to prop something up. And there's one thing I can sort of give to Rocky. Her reaction to her son's death does feel natural, and how she's still kind of mopey about it throughout the entire rest of the show, more or less, I feel works. again, I've already more or less stated my piece about Gengetsu being not the greatest villain outside of his final episodes where he just takes over as final villain. But it's such an anticlimax for all that build. It's just one big mecha fight with a Deus Ex Machina, and that's it. That's more or less the final villain. A very weak ending, and yeah, that's the main villains of this series. Weak. With probably the exception of Kyuemon and Mangetsu, so the Kiraone Army Corps is meh. Okay, if I can go back to being a little more positive for a bit, I do think most of the aesthetics for growing the series are actually pretty good. The suits are well balanced in their color department between the primary color and the black. I think the sash is positioned well and melds into the suit design as if it wasn't one, and I feel like the shuriken aspect of the visors looks sharp. Really, the only issue with the suits are kind of the white boots. With the exception of, I'd say, Shiro Ninja and maybe Momo Ninja and, okay, the Akane Ninja, they kind of feel unfinished. Like they were meant to be either a solid black or more or less that color specifically. And the fact that they're the only white kind of element sounds like the little bit on the sash. Sash kind of feels wonky to me. Also, if I'm talking about the main suits, I kind of wish when Yoshitaki and Samuji become the ninjas near the end, like, it was different shades of red instead of just being Aka Ninja again with a different colored sash. Gosh, it just feels lazy at a point. I don't know how much it costs to make these suits, but I feel like more, let's say, could have more or less been a different. I think my favorite suit has to go to Star Ninjas. It is just the most over-the-top American stereotype that there is. The hat, the poncho, the belt, the fact that he is using an electric guitar for his sword, the burger morpher or changer. It is such over-the-top American stereotyping, and I just adore it because it's so tongue-in-cheek about the whole thing about that, Americans don't get ninjas, and by extension, maybe Japan does not get cowboys to an extent, nor Americans. God, why did I say that? What is wrong with me? Why did I say that? Getting away from that. I do like the changers, or the sword changers too. I'm always fun whenever more or less we step away from, bracelets, cell phones, or anything like that, and more or less the fact that it is kind of like a 2-in-1 sort of thing as being their primary sidearm. One thing I'm not fond of is the amount of weapons they start with. So, they have their basic sword, and then they get their shurikens. But they also now have blasters that are modeled after frogs, which I liked. I think the leg details on them. But then they also have a multi-tool weapon that can either be a sword, or I say sword, but more a knife than anything else, but can also become a claw or a mini belt. It just feels like there's a lot going on here, or more or less like that multi-use weapon should have more or less been specifically like one person had one specific mode. Maybe Takaharu had the dagger mode, and then Yakumo and Nagi had the claw mode, and then the girls had the bow mode instead of just being all over the place. In terms of suits I don't like, Chozetsu, I don't like the bulky look. But it more or less feels like this is a walking house. The bottom half I don't mind looking like a little more armored stuff, but the pauldron portion of it just doesn't look great. This was clearly a red power-up. It was clearly meant just for Takaharu, and then the backlash came in, and then more or less they made it for everyone else. Except the girls who more or less have, Kasuma uses it in a pretty interesting way, and then Fuka has a joke about it. The last form is more a Superstar Ninja, which I like how it looks. I like the kind of poncho cape that it has going on with it, but yeah, this was clearly made for toys. It is extremely underutilized. I think only a total of 5 times. Never once used in any of the movies, and more or less, I get the feeling that more or less, look, this season did not do well. This season tanked hard, and more or less, I'm guessing this, and by extension, the strongest ninja sword, ninja sword, and one of the mechs was introduced because the series was more or less not doing well sales-wise. But yeah, let's talk about mecha. So one of the things I was supposed to talk about was more or less this series was more or less meant to be representative of cool Japan. And with all the stuff. And of course, seeing as how this was technically the 40th anniversary of the original Himitsu Sentai Go Ranger, so it sort of had not many but some celebratory elements. So like the mecha this season were based around the numerous kinds of mecha. So we have the humanoid and shinobi Maru, animals both mythical and normal in Dragomar and Inui Maru, Wanmaru, and vehicles in the train and dump track. And it's not very good. I like how they look on their own. On their own, they look fine. And I like the idea of, like, you know, the kind of power loader-esque design of it, but it looks like a whole bunch of different mechs just kind of kit bashed together with no sense of combined aesthetic. And despite the whole power loader thing, only really Shinobumar and Dragomar, which I will more or less flat out say just doesn't look good at all. I'll ever get it. The rest don't get anything when you think they could have just had little ninjas jump out of that. To more or less do the body thing. Also, the initial part of this season just like dumps a whole bunch of auxiliary mecha on us. Like first there's the UFO, which doesn't look bad though the gun doesn't. So first there's like Pound. No, more or less, guys. First there's the Elephant Zord, which is introduced in episode 4. And then after that they get a second auxiliary mecha in the form of a UFO. Like, there's a decent distance between the next two auxiliary Zords between the UFO and the Surfer Zord, but here's the issue. All of those Zords get thrown away once Lion Hollow shows up, and I don't hate the initial fortress look that this suit's going for. It's imposing, a bit regal looking with the kind of castle and house motif it has going. But when it gets into its fighting form, I have one word for you. Bulky. It is so armored, and it keeps the treadmills from its fortress without doing much to hide it. Also, what is up with that cockpit? Like, why of all places did anyone think that was the best place to be? That is like the most easily attackable position. All someone needs to do is just snipe it and bam, the person in there is dead. Then, if it's trying to almost be a unique cockpit, without having to make a new one exclusive for this, I don't mind, but really, you couldn't have more or less made it, like, protected in some way? And the bigger issue comes more or less not long after. Whereas we get our big ultra combo between the three main mechs of Lion Hao, Sherry Kenjin, and the yet-to-be-mentioned Bison King in the early 20s. Look, mech fights are hard to keep interesting. They always happen at the end of an episode, and keeping them unique and fresh can be difficult. But this is like trying to make them the most uninteresting. Like, this kills almost all interest in most mech fights because, well, the team has the strongest weapon they have available to take on any of the giant monsters. Like, they'll fight outside of the main Zord form, but then they'll transform into it and use the final attack like no business. Yes, bang, 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 you win, go rest our heroes. There's no tension, there's nothing. Nothing, and more or less it only feels like a serious whenever they can't form the Ultra combination. And when you have to more or less resort to that, there are issues. But yeah, the last portion of that, Star Ninja's own personal mecha is fine. I think the fact that more or less it combines two basic mechs instead of trying to combine into one major one does it a bit more of a favor in that it doesn't look too kit back. Bash, I think the white underbody goes well with the brown that is on most of this suit. The shoulders are again another big issue. I know I've been talking about that a lot, but I like the finisher. It's just this docking its enemy to death. Oh yeah, it could also combine with Shurikenjin and to make a new mech. And I don't like it. It's just two sets of feet that sit on top of one another. The helmet's too big, and the way Dragon just extends on the right shoulder is... This is just a cluster, and since it's kind of the whole feeling, like... I would say, like, the last mech is definitely the best one. Gekiyatsu. It helps that unlike the earlier... The initial mech, this one has a centralized theme around animals, plus a panda and a carp. It's not too bulky. I think the orange accents will work with the blue and white on the suit, though its finisher is probably one of the dumber ones I have seen, where they just launch themselves at the foe, and somehow that does not make them bloody giblets. But it's like, yeah, they could be going at supersonic speeds, but... Yeah, that's just more overthinking on my end alongside the Lion Hello cockpit design. The yokai designs are next. I like the main family's kind of rather demonic and samurai design kind of like. The one design thing I like is more like this is actually a ninja versus samurai, seeing as how samurai and ninjas are enemies in real life. I like the grunt's looks. That's kind of... And the blue is pretty unique and more. It kind of has this grunt look with how they evolve. I think the main designs are where things get a little dicey. I think some look great, like Yuki-Onna and the Western yokai, Kasha. But then there's the likes of the Yamibiko, Otoroshi, and Mokuren that are just a little too loud or just obnoxiously designed. Other things of more or less note here. I think most of the music is kind of... and I think the main theme is okay enough. I like the ending more for its kind of festival kind of theme. Star Ninja's theme was a pretty solid insert theme. Lion Hello's theme is also a solid pumper-upper. Kyoimon's theme was a nice somber song. Song stands out against the rest of the much more hard rock kind of festival kind of thing. The action is mixed. There's some really solid physical wire, but more or less it's mixed with a lot of CG, because like the thing was, this was like they were bringing in a lot of new and fresh stunt blood, but it's kind of buried in some of that CG to a point. And more. As of course, there's the mech issues. Some episodes worth talking. There's of course like the free episodes I brought up with Yakumo 18, 33, and 30. about how the show is really bad about managing tone. Like 18 focuses on the group riding a lawnmower. Kai and Yakumo's for some reason acting very odd, and then it's revealed that the lawnmower is his. That the lawnmower is his, and because he's an English gentleman, the lawnmower is just as important as anything else, which is like, this should be the most absurd and ridiculous thing, but like, it's again the issue that the acting is not the best. 33 has one of the Carione's these ninjas poison hat the team, but Yakumo protects her, and this ninja falls in love on sight, and then hijinks ensues. It was because neither side can understand the other. And again, we have the serious situation of people dying, mixed with more essentially a replay of Romeo and Juliet. And then the last one sees a classmate of Yakumo's from his school come to visit him, and for some reason the cool cocky kid has been lying that more or less his team is a magic sentai. Like, yes, the girl is still kind of a child, but let's do, come on, tell the truth. None of these situations feel good, and it feels overly pushed to a point, and I'm not fond of the lying kind of thing. But one arc that I'm not particularly fond of is like the Western yokai art. So like, this is a really like built up thing. Like, these Western yokais that Rake brings in based off of Frankenstein's monster, Dracula and the Wolfman, are like poised to be the biggest challenge, and they're one and done with the exception of the Wolfman, who is a two-parter because of his history with Kenji Wallace being the climax of his story. And really, they're not that much trouble. Franken just shows up during the amusement park episode. Dracula's was luring a bunch of girls because of the plot, though I will give credit where more lets its due that the whole garlic Yosa thing to out the monster is a pretty interesting thing. And while the Wolfman two-parter was good for Kenji's story, it doesn't really feel earned. He just gets Chozetsu to curb stomp him. It's kind of disappointing considering how this could have more or less been used for more of the month, since the summer arc is basically just a whole bunch of filler nonsense that does nothing for the plot. There's no growth for anyone whatsoever. However, there's episode 4, which has the worst acted laugh I've ever seen. Seeing them more or less Takahara getting teach the good old Miyagi style about more or less how working together yields a better result for a ramen analogy, which I'm not fond of. I should probably more or less get some more positive things. I think Kasumi's first solo episode is arguably the first good episode of the season. The ninja crossover is more or less pretty solid. I like Mangetsu's introductory episode, and the episodes revolving around him. The one episode where more or less Kinji and Bison King end up in a contract, and more or less Kasumi has to get them out of it, is also a pretty fun one, because I think there's some solid mech work there. I think the Ninja School one's also a pretty solid one, but it's like 10% of the episodes when I'm not just frustrated. Now, I can't say for certain this is going to be quote-unquote the worst Sentai I've seen. At this point, I've only watched like 7, and if you're not wanting to count the one you watched as they're airing, that's actually 5 I watched. But yeah, this season is not the greatest. The whole competition aspect doesn't feel memorable at all, especially when they become their own kinds of last ninjas at the end. And the characters are range from mostly bad, forgettable, to the very few who are good. There's some fun aesthetics, but there's a lot that I don't like, and the action music is fine. There's like some enjoyability here. here, but unless you're really wanting to more, let's see what the whole hubbub is about it. Yeah, you can probably wait on this for a little bit until you've gotten enough others under your belt. It's not something worth immediately checking out. But I guess there's one positive here. Only 2 movies. Anyways, considering how much I've been to write about Gavin Drive's movie, recently that's gonna be a pain. But yeah, as you know, subscribe, comment, leave a like. Comment, I probably said that. And we'll see you around for the movies. Hopefully they're not as bad as this.